What does it say? Big wind?
Oh yeah, that's a poem by this poet Theodore Rothke. It's all about a greenhouse going through like a big windstorm or a hurricane. And actually, somebody gave that to Mom and me when we got married, but I'd heard about it before.
I grew up on a farm in Guilford, Connecticut. I spent my early childhood years exploring the barns, feeding the cows, running around the fields, and sliding down mountains of wood chips. My dad, Tom Pinchbeck, ran Pinchbeck's Roses, a business started by my great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather in 1929. For nearly a century, my family grew roses there, but I never really unpacked the legacy of the greenhouse until now.
When I was growing up, we lived right next door to the greenhouses, and I'd go over and play a lot as a kid. So yeah, it was something that I enjoyed and always saw myself doing as I grew older.
Where were the greenhouses going? Lunging, lashing, wind driving water so far down the river.
I wonder what the personalities are. I enjoy working on, one of the things I really like about it, I live in the house that my grandparents lived in. I think about that a lot, sort of continuity of the generations, and wonder what they were like, because I never really knew them directly. But we have a lot in common.
My grandfather, I remember him.
He was a dreamer, had visions of this big greenhouse.
He came over from England, in a little town, I think he was near the coast where they grew some tulips like Holland. And he came over on a cattle boat about 1890. He was the oldest of the family. He was 9 years old. So he ended up in Ridgefield with this greenhouse on the hillside. That's the way they were growing them in Italy and a lot of places in Europe. With the boiler would down at the bottom, and the steam would go up and heat the pipes. And when it got to the top, it would condense into water, and it would come back down. He wasn't growing any roses at the time. He was growing other flowers. And he went to the flower market, which was in New York City on 28th Street. He couldn't find exactly what he wanted, so he said, I'm going to grow my own.
Your boiler was in the hole, basically was in a pit. And so you would have ashes from the coal that you were burning or whatever, and you'd have to haul them out. And my great-grandfather got tired of that.
In 1929, he got tired of lugging the ashes out of a pit.
I'm going to build a greenhouse that's flat so I don't have to do that.
So that's when he found Guilford, and that's when he built the big greenhouse. Lord and Burnham, they were big builders of greenhouses in the U.S., and that was the widest greenhouse they built, 81 foot wide. It was 1,200 feet. It was one of the longest they ever built, too.
What he had to do instead was have pumps. Because it's flat, the steam would go out, but the water wouldn't come back because it wasn't going downhill anywhere. So you'd have to collect it and then pump it back.
He borrowed a lot of money, and there was a huge debt. And then the Depression came. So the market fell, the rose market fell, just like the dollars fell. Then he retired right away. He got tired of everything. He went to Florida, Miami.
He was hard on people. He was not a pleasant guy to be around, is my understanding. Of course, Bert says that my grandfather would sneak around in his tennis shoes. I don't know if that's true. Checking on the workers. I don't know what that meant, but...
My dad, he started trucks on the road delivering direct to florists. And by 1936, he paid off the debt that we had. So that's when he built the second greenhouse, a 600-footer. We had to go collect the roses in a little van and bring them up to where your garage is. And that's where we would grade the roses there. And I worked there for about 5 years with my dad. But then he had a heart attack and died.
He died at 57, so that's young. So he got, his life got cut short.
So I took over the rose growing. It was very successful. We had a good market. We had 28th Street. We shipped to Boston and New York. We had about 20 or 30 employees. I was able to put in a profit sharing and pension plan for our employees, and I felt good about that. We graded the roses according to size and shape and everything, and we'd stop at the florist and say, what would you like to buy today? And they would come out and they'd say, well, let me have a dozen of the red ones and yellow or whatever. And that's how we built it up.
All the faucets stopped, so we drained the manure machine for the steam plant, pumping the stale mixture into the rusty boilers, watching the pressure gauge waver over to red.
Then the price of oil, 1972 or 3, I think it was, we were paying 8 cents a gallon, and it went to $1. We couldn't afford that. And so we started burning sawdust and wood chips.
So these are this is the old boiler room. It's not in operation anymore as the boilers themselves, but they were two big 72-inch HRT boilers. Eventually they went to oil, and then back to solid fuels. They were burning sawdust and wood chips for most of the time that I was around.
Our boilers were rated for 150 pounds per square inch, but we were only operating about 4 pounds. See, that pipe was a steam pipe that just 4 pounds of steam. Because the pipes in the greenhouse, they couldn't take any much higher pressure. We decided to go up to like 140 in the boilers themselves. You could use a pressure reducing valve, but we used a steam turbine, and it turned the blades, and then we had a reverse motor that would generate the electricity, and it would flow out. And on a cold night, when we were using a lot of steam out in the greenhouses, we would use enough for our fans and everything, and then sell the rest. So that worked well for a few years, yeah. Finding agricultural workers has always been hard. So we started to get Puerto Ricans who were migrating up. The local people didn't want to do the work anymore. It's hard work. The local population wasn't as interested in doing it anymore. And they were good workers. You could see the advantages of speaking Spanish. And he didn't speak Spanish at the time. And so he went into New York for, 2 weeks or something and took a total immersion class. Most of the greenhouse growers around here were hiring a lot of Spanish-speaking people, but, there wasn't that same interest in trying to communicate with their employees and getting to know them. And luckily I had Bert Sullivan. So when I came back to work full-time, the manager of the greenhouses was Bert Sullivan. Bert, I was a regular employee in the greenhouse. I was just a rose cutter at first, and then after a couple years, a slot opened up as a section foreman who were overseen by Bert Sullivan. So he and I worked pretty closely together. A lot of our work was rose related, but also mechanically dealing with boilers and steam fitting and all that kind of thing. That it takes equipment to run these farms and greenhouses. And we did most of the repairs ourselves. He would always pull me in when there was something like that, and we'd work on it together. So yeah, we worked pretty closely together.
As the seams hissed and the live steam drove to the far end of the rose house where the worst wind was, creaking the cypress window frames, cracking so much thin glass, we stayed all night, stuffing the holes with burlap.
That worked out well until the Jets came in. They started growing roses in Ecuador and Colombia, near the equator, so they had plenty of sunshine. You know, they were on a high altiplane there.
I came back full-time in 1991. I had graduated college and done a few different things after college and was ready to sort of settle into Guilford and go back into the family business. At that point, imports were starting to take over a larger percentage of our business in general, or the rose business in general. But we were still doing pretty well. We had some decent years, but it was a slow decline, for sure. The markets were changing too. In addition to imports coming in, supermarkets became an important segment of the business. So we started selling to one of the bigger independent stores, Stu Leonard's. We started selling to Stu Leonard's and this and that. That moved a lot of product, but it was at a discounted price. So it was still, still sort of funneling down. My dad retired in 2000, so we worked together for 9 years. He retired, and then I ran it myself until 2008, at which point it was really a struggle to make ends meet, and we were sort of one of the last rose growers to close its doors. We had our costs down pretty low. We were burning the sawdust for heat. We were producing electricity with the cogen turbine. We could operate fairly inexpensively compared to a lot of the other rose growers. Our holidays were Valentine's Day. Back in the day, Easter was a big one, but by the time I got on, Easter was not that big of a holiday for us. And then Mother's Day was a big holiday. The rest of the year was just sort of break even. That's what a lot of the growers would say.
We didn't think they were going to be able to do it, but they did. They put us out of business.
When we shut down the roses, it was a little depressing for me.
But she rode it out, that old rose house. She hove into the teeth of it, the core and pith of that ugly storm, ploughing her stiff prow.
A friend of mine who I went to college with, he has an autistic son. He asked me if I'd be interested in the farm as a training facility for autistic people.
This Valentine's Day, you'll find more than just beautiful flowers blooming at Roses for Autism in Guilford. The employees, just like the roses, thrive with love and care. What makes this nonprofit so special is the career training they provide for individuals with autism so they can find meaningful, permanent employment in their communities.
There's a high unemployment rate for folks on the autism spectrum and a large need of agricultural workers, and he thought that would be a nice marriage of the two needs.
I was working as a member of a team and not just spearheading one effort myself. Not to just have people on the spectrum working there, but to have a community of all sorts of different people. So me, there's Lori, she was the retail manager for a while. We all held different positions over the course of the 10 years, but Julie ran it for a while. That's Jim Lyman. So Jim came up with the idea and was the one who I went to college with and pitched it. And that's his son, Eli.
Remember, we cut every day, so every day we get more roses. So selling out isn't really, we'll have roses the next day, but Connecticut grown.
I was originally encouraging them to look into other crops because I knew roses was a tricky one. But we did have a name, pinchbeck roses were pretty well known in the area.
These are all pinchback varieties, not their varieties, but varieties that were grown by the family for the last 80 years.
People were interested in it. We would do training and then also do like coaching for interviewing and job searches, and that was a whole component of it too. And then find jobs for people outside. So for instance, we had one employee who enjoyed working the cash register, he learned to work with the people, greet people properly. He was able to get a job at the CVS down the street, and he's still there to this day. And every time I see him, he's like, "You guys taught me how to do this," and he's a real cheerleader. So that was, one of the many success stories, and that became the model.
How are the orders coming in for Valentine's Day?
Good. Pre-orders have been good. We're very excited. Some people are worried we'll sell out, but we won't. We will be here.
Bucking into the wind waves that broke over the hull of her, flailing her sides with spray, flinging long strings of wet across the rooftop, finally veering, wearing themselves out merely.
Just like it was, for the same reasons, it was hard for us as Pinchbecks to really get that to work. That trend continued, and it was really hard. We thought perhaps because it was Roses for Autism and we had this whole sort of social enterprise, we might get more sales, and I think we did, but it wasn't enough. So it lasted for 10 years. So we went on for 10 years, but after 10 years, Ability Beyond, the organization in Bethel, decided that they were going to have to pull the plug on the program, and they pulled out of the area and went back to Bethel. So that was disappointing, but understandable. I mean, I'd go through that myself, so I understood their decisions completely. Roses for Autism had put some feelers out somehow. I think there were some ads in some agricultural magazine, like the Connecticut Agricultural Magazine, that's put out by the Department of Agriculture in Connecticut. Not too many people read that. I didn't think much was going to come from it, but they did get someone answered their ad, maybe 6 months later, looking for greenhouse space, and it was this organization. They grew hydroponic lettuce, and they started off in half the big greenhouse. They rented out. It worked out really nicely because as Roses for Autism shrank a little more, they're like, well, we're going to go down to just a quarter of the house. H2O was like, okay, we'll take over the rest of their space. It was fairly painless for everybody involved in terms of what was going to happen. They were going to move in as Roses pulled out, and Roses was happy to get out. H2O was happy to move in, and I was happy to have somebody growing stuff in there.
Whistling thinly under the wind vents, she sailed until the calm morning, carrying her full cargo of roses. Theodore Rothke.